Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Enterprise Alchemy. As always, I'm Ant. Today I'm joined by Sofy Richards, Chief Operating Officer, Sovereign Advisory Practice at Dentons, one of the largest law firms in the world. Sophie, thanks very much for joining us today.
No problem. Great to be here.
So first question straight out of the gate, Sovereign Advisory, what is that?
So, at a really high level, it's basically advising governments, state-owned bodies, sovereign wealth funds. I mean, traditionally, it was around public debt and debt restructuring. For us at Dentons, it's quite a lot broader. So, we mainly focus on emerging markets where public debt intersects with other critical areas such as energy, infrastructure, foreign investment.
Right, okay, right. Advising government on the big ticket items.
Yeah, pretty much. Last year, we did a really big piece that's been in the news quite a lot with Ecuador on a debt for nature swap. So it was an exchange of $1.628 billion of dollars of sovereign debt into $656 million of new debt. And that basically allowed the country to redirect pretty much half that money into sustainability commitments for the Galapagos Islands.
Okay, I love the Galapagos. I mean, I know it's one of those things, I was sort of like it'd be amazing to see in person, but at the same time, I don't want to go messing with it. And I'd always just as a kid, I thought, oh, how good would it be to have a Galapagos tortoise? Those things are amazing. And they'd outlive you,
really
but then I'm like, you just leave them in their habitat. Probably shouldn't go messing with that too much.
It's like when you go to zoos, isn't it? And it's amazing if you see, like, I don't know, a lion up close, but then you're like, but actually, is that ethical?
Right, yeah.
Or should I just watch a YouTube video?
Right, there's sort of the feeling a little bit, and, there's that's a whole rabbit hole. But I totally, I agree, right? You start to feel that, well, should these creatures just be back where they're supposed to be? That then if their environment's been torn apart, that's a whole nother can of worms. So for you, Sophie, leading up to, where you are now as Chief Operating Officer, what are just start us off, some of the key lessons you've learned as your career's kind of, changed and shaped and grown over the years.
So, I mean, there are a few things that come to mind. The first of which is the difference between perception and reality. So, example from like really early on in my career. So I was working for the Environment Agency at the time, and I went to a training session all about how you are perceived. And we all sat down in the room. I was quite new in. I was, 23, so quite inexperienced at the time. And we had to use 3 Post-it notes to describe ourselves. So I was using Post-its like Riven was definitely one of the ones I put up. And then we all had to put them up on the wall. And then everyone kind of assigned them to the different people. And I was expecting to get kind of similar Post-its back to what I put up. And instead I was getting words like approachable. And I remember being really surprised that some of the things that I consider a key part of myself didn't necessarily come across. And it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I was junior. I shouldn't be unapproachable. But at the same time, it was kind of a bit of a lesson that stuck with me. Just that kind of gap between your self-perception and the external perception.
Yep.
So another thing is just around adapting to the environment you're in. So I would consider myself sector agnostic. So I've moved across quite a few different sectors, very different sizes of company, from a 4-person startup to 100,000 plus. So I've got quite a broad experience. And I think one of the things I've really learned is you need to adapt to the environment you're in. That doesn't mean you can't be a catalyst for change. But if you go into an environment where people are uncomfortable with large amounts of change, and it's more of those kind of step changes, you need to adapt. Otherwise, you're not going to succeed. You're just going to hit brick walls and you won't kind of get credibility.
Now that's I think a really interesting point, right? Because people can talk about the mechanics of change all day long, but this is something that I see is often, let's say, overlooked. Like you said, is adaptability. So, and I suppose in old parlance, it might be like read the room, because I know sometimes, you have new execs come in, things like that, like in a whirlwind, and say, and there's a couple of organizations for me that come to mind, not super large, but thousands, large enough. And you look at them and you talk to the new incoming executive, I'm going to make all these changes. And, I'm like in my mind thinking, yeah, I've been around this company now for 10 years. I've seen 5 of your predecessors come and go, and they all say the same thing. So there is this sort of innate, can be, right? Sometimes people are well up for it and they're saying, yeah, we need to do this, but beware and I think understand the nuance of the environment, I think that's a really salient point. I also like, Sophie, you approachable. That's very, I would say so. You're very, you've got a very nice demeanor. So I don't think, as much as you might have seen yourself back in the day, I'm the hard worker, I'm this or that. You got the people person in there, right?
Thank you. I remember also at the Environment Agency, I was one of the early members of the Women's Network there, right. And I got quite heavily involved in the Women's Network and organising events. And there was one thing I did where we were interviewing senior leaders both within the Environment Agency and externally to get different perspectives for women. And I remember watching some of the recordings back and being like, wow, I look really intense. It's really difficult because however good you are at kind of reflection and self-analysis and all those sides of things, even if you get really great feedback, and by great, I don't necessarily mean positive, I mean constructive, from people around you, you will still have blind spots.
Now, I got to ask, this background, awesome to me. I love that kind of space stuff. So is that from a game, or is that just a random?
It's just a random picture on Teams that I quite liked. In my spare time, I read a lot of fiction, with probably my number one genre being sci-fi. So it kind of, the slightly dystopian element appealed to me.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. Because I looked at it and I was like, yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Martian landscape, loving it. So, all right, let's go down this thread or pull on this thread a little further. So, I know we've talked before, I've seen on your LinkedIn and stuff, you talk about the ability to navigate complex challenges. And we've talked a little bit about adaptability. What are some of the things, let's say, beyond that, or maybe including that, I don't know, that have really had an impact on you as you've shaped your career to this point?
So I think, I was thinking through some examples of those kind of complex challenges that I've been involved in, and it's definitely been a red thread throughout my career. Those are the things that tend to interest me. And I think for me, I've really shifted away from the kind of directive approach, which probably comes slightly more naturally to me. Sort of, I don't know if you know much about insights, but I'm a motivating director, and I am very, very red. Like I come out at like 97% on the red,
right?
Which I think I hide relatively well, so I don't scare people. But at the same time, that's kind of my natural inclination. And as I've kind of gone through my career, the environments I've worked in where we have really engaged people and given people accountability and responsibility, their level has had much better impact. So when I was at BT, one of the big things I had to do was create the multi-brand digital strategy for EE and BT.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And I was given some very explicit direction by my boss, who was the chief digital officer for D&E at the time, not to do it myself. He was like, I know you are capable of doing something like this yourself. Do not. I want you to go out. I want you to form groups. I want you to make sure you've got a really diverse group of people in those working groups. And I want you to facilitate. I want you to get them to do it. And, there were definitely things that I didn't 100% agree with, but we got board sign off in 3 months of that. Now, it wasn't the final version.
Yeah.
Still, that was a huge achievement. And I think if I'd just done it, it would never have been anywhere near as good. And not only not as good, but actually it meant people were talking about it organically and getting buy-in organically because they were involved, because they were excited about the change, because they felt they had some ownership of the change. And, when you're going through those mergers, it is a nervous time. even if you're in the driving seat. And I think that involvement of people led to a better product, but also much better engagement, therefore leading to a more sustainable change.
Right. So this, I think, is a fascinating point. And for me, it's linked, and bear with me, this may seem a little abstract, but I will try and draw this together. Any of those endeavors where you have to get people on board to do things, so we can call it change, but equally, you know, you could, because you spoke about having worked in a small, like very small environment. I'm familiar with starting something from the ground, developing the products, all of that type of thing. And one of the, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. As a person who is driven, and so you're always, we got to get to the next goal, we got to move forward. Sometimes I wonder if there's the temptation to do it yourself is because other people will just slow you down in your mind. I certainly feel this at times. However, whether you're building a product, whether you're changing a process, unless you're getting ground up feedback from the people that it impacts, and whether, you know, they're choosing to spend their money with you or they're choosing to invest their time, all of those things are a choice. I'm going to stay where I am or I'm going to move forward. So I suppose, is that something you felt? I don't want to let go because I want to just get it done, but I know that I need to let it go, particularly if you are that very directive, goal-driven type person?
Massively.
Uh-huh.
What I would say is I'm quite aware of where my skills lie and where I need other people to help me because I don't have the skill set. Like,
Right.
you know, I can read a set of management accounts, I can do a cash flow forecast, but when it comes to like in-depth financial knowledge, I'm not an accountant.
Yeah,
You've got to
got
like
ya.
know your limits. But I think what I've also learned is, you know what, at the beginning, when you're involving those other people, and it does slow it down quite dramatically. You know, it's the whole, diversity of thought thing. It's more effective in the sort of medium to long term, but in the short term, it can be quite disruptive to your timeline.
Yeah.
But you then, once you've got that psychological safety, once you've got that team talking and thinking and acting, you go so much faster that it's worth the I'm going to sit on my hands and I am not going to be too directive. You know, you can steer, you can give input, but I think it's a lesson learned rather than a natural inclination, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've learned, because I have that kind of inclination as well. Come on, let's just get it done. Let's just move on to it'll be fine. We've got to move on. However, one of the biggest mistakes I think I made early on, and probably into my mid-30s at least, was directing instruction rather than asking the right questions. You know, so giving them the answer, and that whole, basically you're giving them a fish rather than teaching them how to fish.
I can empathize with that, definitely.
Right. And then, so my other co-founders, Nathan, he's always been about, hey, we need to understand what we're doing first. So we need to ask the questions, right? And if we learn to ask good questions, we'll get to the answers, but we've got to go through that process first. And whilst it can, like you said, can seem slow in the initial, first days, weeks, in fact, once you gather all of that information, you're so much more likely to get it right first time. And I suppose the thing I would connect this to a little bit, and I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but is the Agile project methodology.
I was going to say the same thing. It's basically the fundamentals of Agile in a more conceptual level. It is that whole collaboration, bringing the experts in and letting the experts make more decisions works better in the long run.
Right, and testing and learning quick. So saying we've only got to get, rather than we need to get all the way over there, that's good. That might be the end game. So we've got to have clarity on that. But in terms of the day-to-day, it's just, we just got to make a step. As long as we're going forward, and we got to just do that consistently and make sure
And we've got to assess.
Yeah.
We've got to reflect after. It's not about change. It's about change, pause, reflect. And, I am, like I said, I'm very much a sort of 300 miles an hour person. And I have learned that whilst I can make decisions incredibly quickly, it's also better for me often to sleep on things.
Yeah.
Because I'll think of nuances, or I'll go, actually, you know what? Whilst I could make the decision on this, and if it was a crisis, I would probably make a reasonable decision. This is not a crisis situation, and having more information to base my decision on will likely lead to a better outcome.
Yeah, one of the things I've learned, I think, in that vein is taming my impulsivity. And honestly, what people I've worked with, one guy in particular, and my wife as well, it's like exactly what you just said. Before you send that, just sleep on it. See how you feel in the mornings. And
I mean, yeah, every time we go on holiday, I always end up doing something impulsive. The last time, which admittedly was last year, but yeah, we went to Santorini, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend as a destination, but I might have had a few cocktails and then chartered a boat.
God, okay.
It wasn't it wasn't a huge amount of money, being realistic, but it was still the whole. We were like, we're going to have a sensible holiday. We're going to be sensible, and then second night in, have a couple of cocktails, and I go, right, I'm doing this.
Wow. Okay.
It was great. It was worth the money. I'm glad I did it. But it's very different doing that when you're on holiday to making a decision as well. The sorts of decisions that affect people, because actually, when you get to a certain level, all your decisions affect people, and you've got to remember that it's not just about you and what you think's right. It's about the impact on other people.
Yeah. So there's a question, because this is something I've felt I had to wrestle with. So I'm interested to see how you think and feel about this. Is that as much as it's about bringing your authentic self to work, right? So you be you, but at the same time, there are things that you can do, I feel, and particularly around this, like you were talking decision making. My personal preferred style of making decisions is, I know, ineffective in a work context, if you will. So I have to apply more thought, more rigor, more organization to those things. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily changing who you are, but maybe, I don't know how you'd put that, building.
It's adapting.
It's back to your point. Yeah, that's true.
But I completely agree on the authenticity front. Like, when I was much younger, I remember thinking like I had work Sophie and I had home Sophie, and they were quite different. Like not like 100% different, but like different facets of it. This is going to sound pretentious, but of a gemstone. You've got the bit you show at work, and then the bit you show at home, and they don't necessarily.
Right. Yeah.
They're on the same thing, but they don't necessarily really touch. And I think as I've gotten older, more confident, all those sorts of things, I've been like, actually, you know what? I'm just me, and I do tone down things for work or dial them up equally. I think I remember having a conversation with someone some time ago, and they shall absolutely remain anonymous, but about authenticity.
Right.
And it was a little bit of a heated discussion, because their belief was that they should be able to come into the office and kind of inflict their mood on anyone else. And that if they shouted at someone, that person should understand they're not going to get fired, that they're just having a bad day and it will be fine. And I remember having this conversation where I was like, okay, yeah, so if you're having a bad day, you shouldn't have to turn up to work and be like, la, 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 la. It's absolutely fine to be like, guys, I'm having a bit of a bad day. Unless it's urgent, can you just kind of leave me alone and I'm just going to get my head down? That's absolutely fine. But it's not then okay to consider as part of being authenticity to inflict your bad mood on everyone else. And also, if you're senior and you're doing that, that person, whether or not you're like, they should know they won't get fired, is going to feel insecure.
Yeah.
So you can be you can bring your whole self to work, but you just need to bear in mind that your whole self impacts other people.
I couldn't agree more. So, because this could be equally applicable in the home, right? So, let's say you say, well, my authentic self, and you go, yeah, but you're a bit of an asshole. So it's like, you can't really be an ineffective asshole if it doesn't give one carte blanche to just act however they want to act,
No.
not take, because that I suppose is to me where the edge, it starts to bleed off there, and like you say, all these things are adaptation, they're nuanced, but this is one of the things I think, if you go too far into the authenticity, then it's, you're not taking accountability for your own behavior. If
Yep.
you're going to, well, I can do whatever. Well, no, you can't. Not really, because that's why we got to live in a society. Like we can't go around just killing people, for example.
No.
So,
can't.
so there are limits. So I think it's like, it's interesting, this whole discussion we're having about how you merge these things together in an environmentally appropriate context. Like to me, that
and how you realize you're doing it as well. And I think a lot of that is that it goes back to that psychological safety in the workplace. If people feel safe, they will tell you if you're being a dickhead. They will, and they may not tell you in the moment, but they will tell you later if they were like, actually, you know what, I was really unhappy with how you did that.
Yeah.
Actually, this came across to me as this, and it gives you that opportunity to reflect and go, okay, maybe I haven't got the balance quite right here.
Yeah, and that particularly as a senior, executive leader, you're setting the standards of behavior for the organization. So if you think it's okay to act like that, you're, whether it's consciously or otherwise, passing the message to others that, that's okay to act like that. And I've met CEOs and worked for them who definitely fall into that category. And they're never, like long term, they're never effective. They might get stuff in the short term, but the wheels fall off the cart eventually. So that leads me very nicely then into this question of well-being. I know this is something you're passionate about. Increasingly, we understand, and I don't know why it's taken so long, because in sports teams, they've known this for a long time. When you talk about peak human performance in almost any other, through almost any other lens other than work, right? It's well understood. But well-being, and let's call it centeredness, not self-centered, but you know what I mean, where you're balanced, that is increasingly seen as critical for high performance in the workplace. So what are your thoughts on, what well-being means for people in a practical sense?
So actually, for my exec MBA, for my dissertation, it was well-being. So It was around kind of creating a strategic framework for well-being. So I've kind of done quite a lot of thoughts around this side of things. I think the first thing is there isn't a definition of well-being. So you say well-being to one person and it might mean physical health. To someone else, it might mean mental health. To people in some countries or situations, it might be something that's just not even worth thinking about because it's not a priority. So I think for me, well-being is kind of the balance of having a sort of meaningful life, but also a happy life. And it's kind of the two together create well-being. So it's more of I know it sounds a bit paradoxical, but I think it's more of a both and that it's about finding a balance between the two. As you said, in sports science, it's not exactly a new concept, but the investment in well-being for companies yields a 5-to-1 return on investment. And that's research from Gallup and other such Deloitte well-known companies. It's not just a figure I pulled out of nowhere. But I think it needs to be a strategic approach to well-being within a company, not just led by HR. And it's not that HR don't have a role to play, but I think for me, there is a bit of a conflict of interest, a perceived conflict of interest, certainly from an employee perspective. If the same person who might be the one who has to terminate your contract is also telling you to go and have an hour's walk every day, I think it's a bit of a conflict of interest. And I think companies tend towards going, here are all our well-being things. Here you can have some training here, or you can do this, or you can do that. And I think they kind of need to take a step back and give the decision-making power to the employees. So there's always going to be a budget, right? But it's about providing a suite of options within that product and within that budget, and allowing employees to choose what works for them to feed back on what works for them. So using things like employee resource groups to understand where people are struggling at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't realize you'd done a dissertation on this.
It's like 90 pages. I wouldn't suggest reading it.
Well, no, but I love that that you've thought about this long and hard, because this is something I've been thinking of or thinking about as well from the psychological literature, and then also trying to balance, because there has to be a balance, I think, as well, right? Where at the end of the day, people are coming together for a common goal. Now, obviously, if you're working in government or non-profit / third sector, those things are slightly different. But at the end of the day, if you have customers, you're trying to service those customers, make them happy, and make money in the process. But that there's a purpose, there has to be a purpose beyond money, right? And so what I'm starting to wonder, because I hear a lot of complex language out there, and I'm the kind of person that always wants to break it down and say, okay, can I explain it to my 9-year-old in a way that he's going to go, yeah, I get what you're saying, Dad. And so to me, there's 3 interlocking parts. 2 are to do with the individual, and I think that is doing stuff that you're good at, right? That you enjoy. I think that's if you're good at it and you enjoy it, it gives you a reason to get up in the morning. And this is something I was doing a pod yesterday actually, and spoke to a guy in South Africa, and he was saying, "Oh, the good litmus test is how do you feel Sunday night?"
Yeah.
And if you're full of dread, then that's a sign, right? So I think it's like, if you're doing things you enjoy, like you enjoy the role, it plays to your strengths, you're good at it, and then it's adding value to the company, then it's like, okay, so whatever we have to do to just strike that balance. And I think the well-being thing, having talked to people who are in that space, kind of providing those services to corporates and things like that, one of the things I noticed is there was a huge rush to spend money on it, but without, to your point, taking a step back and saying, what are we actually trying to do here? What are we trying to achieve? And it almost became like a greenwashing type thing. Oh, we have well-being, which is just basically saying, well, we bought some programs in and there you go.
An annual seminar on mindfulness.
Right. Yeah. So we'll all, do that. We'll do a gong bath once every 3 months. And it's like, okay, maybe it works for some people. But I just can't help but think, are we getting back to this theme that seems to be running through this about you've got to adapt to the environment. So, and the only way to do that is getting feedback from people, which is exactly what, to your point about having these employee resource groups and saying, and the other thing that I think here might be something for HR professionals, we've got a lot of those in the audience to think about, and this is something I've been thinking about for a while, is when you start to get to things, let's call it, coaching, psychological well-being, where people are disclosing and need to be in a safe space, right, to disclose things, particularly if, let's say, I'm having a problem with my boss, right? The classic, my boss is an arsehole, where it kind of runs into trouble, I think, where there's a fine line, and, you might call it Chinese walls, but I'm not sure how that works in practice, is, if they are then coached by someone in HR, it's like, do you really want to be divulging all that? And you kind of need to get that off your chest in order to move forward and understand how to make sense of it. So I feel there might be slight conflict of interest in some of these things, where it's, no, if you really do want to get someone external rather than having HR do it all. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think also with things like well-being, if it's just seen as another L&D initiative or another HR initiative, again, it kind of inhibits buy-in, because people see kind of bias or as you said, the kind of conflict of interest, whether or not that's entirely accurate or not. That's what people perceive. And I think it's very important with coaching and things like that for people to be impartial, and as to be able to have that safe environment. I'm not sure I would be comfortable disclosing something that maybe is impacting my performance in my private life to someone in HR.
Yeah.
Whereas actually an independent coach I'd be quite happy going, this is what I'm going through. How do I balance it all? How do I minimize the impact of work? How do I, that sort of help and support to, because you've got your own answers. Then that's the whole thing about coaching, isn't it? It's helping you help yourself. But yeah, I agree. It's not that I think, it's not that I think all HR professionals are like catbirds, but there is a conflict there because most HR professionals it's about the company. It's about protecting and supporting the company. And when the employee's interests don't necessarily align with the company's interests or what are perceived as the company's interests, there's a conflict.
Right. And so I think that one is good food for thought. And also, I think it's potentially unfair to burden HR folks because once you've heard, and I'm deliberately being obtuse here and using a very extreme example, right? But if someone, they were like, they talked to your friend or whatever, and they said, well, yeah, I beat my neighbor within an inch of his life or whatever, then you would go, now I know this information. I can't not have a feeling about it, And I think a lot of people, or at least I would, is like, okay, now I'm reconsidering my friendship with this person, right? Now I don't feel quite safe anymore because what happens if they do that to me, right? And so in a HR context, I think it's if they know these tensions exist, if they know there's these performance issues, how do they take that out of their mind when they're then trying to impartially assess if there are those types of issues which require HR intervention? Yeah, that one I think is real messy.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also agree it shouldn't be HR's job to try and manage the well-being of all the employees in an organization. That's a big thing. So make it separate. Make it independent.
100%. And I think there's also, just on that, at least I hope, this is something I've been trying to advocate for over a decade, but is saying you need to get, away from HR as the policing, but also as the one who just, if you have a big problem with an employee, you just come to HR because you're basically then just spoon feeding people all the time. And then they become dependent on that, which then creates a bigger shared services function. Whereas if the people can resolve things at the local level as much as possible, it means that not only are, the actual day-to-day decisions becoming much more efficient, but you don't have that run into that scale problem, right? Of like, okay, now I need a huge HR function just to deal with all of these issues. Right?
Proper management training and recognizing that management is a technical skill as much as coding or deploying Microsoft Intune to the entire organization. Management is also a skill, and not everyone has it. Not everyone is good at it. Not everyone is interested in it. But actually, if you train managers properly, it reduces that sort of requirement, as you said, for shared services, because a good manager should be a bit of a generalist.
Right.
They should know a bit about HR. They should know a bit about finance. They should have that kind of broad spectrum of understanding, skills and experience.
And so this is been my thing is when people say, and this has always been the strange thing for me, they'll say, I'll send an executive off to do $100,000 course at Harvard, but no, the frontline manager, we can't spend 500 quid on them. And you go, hey, but this is where I think the link hasn't yet been made, is that stuff being more effective at the local level where the work is being done means your shared services functions are slimmer. They think the whole basically engine can run more efficiently.
You can't have an efficient engine without proper processes, procedures, training, all the things for the people who are operating the engine.
Yes, it's 100%. Yeah.
It's just going to blow up.
Yeah, that's right. So let's just change gears a little bit as we're sort of rounding towards the end. Sophie, outside of work. I'm always curious. I love asking. Where do you draw your passion and inspiration beyond just hiring boats randomly in the Mediterranean?
So I would say I'm always someone with kind of a vision / end goal and a vague, but a plan of some description at all. If I have no plan at all, I definitely feel uncomfortable. However, I am not one of those plan it down to the minute type people. So, I think my best holidays, for example, have always been those with some adventure in them, intentional or not. So, at one point, I almost got left at a motorway services station in Myanmar
Right.
with, phones that only worked on Wi-Fi, and
Right.
passport and all the money on the coach. That was an interesting one. And I once went in to finish Lapland, and it was sort of -30 outside, and I went swimming in a lake. I did a lot of wild swimming at the time. I've always really enjoyed it.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, hold on, I can do this. Great, I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to lie, I got in and I was like, photos, and then I got out. But I kind of I like that side of things. But then kind of on the flip side, like my R&R is held up with a book. Like I said earlier, I read voraciously. I have a room in the house which is slightly pretentiously called the library, but basically all it is at the minute it's just a room full of boxes of books. Right. And like a comfy seat where I go and hide.
Everybody has their own way, right? And sometimes it's just taking a holiday from your own mind is nice.
Yeah. And like I have a very, very stereotypically millennial during lockdown, huge collection of houseplants. I think I'm on about 80 at the minute. And this is despite the fact that my husband has referred to me as Dignitas for plants before. Well, we moved into this house and the boiler didn't work for the first winter, and it was 12 degrees max inside the whole winter. About half my plants died. Dignitas for plants. Yeah.
Wow.
Who is Sophie outside work? Dignitas for plants.
Wow. The Harold Shipman of the plant world.
That got dark very quickly.
Yeah, it did, didn't it? So is there any advice that you would give to the younger Sophie? I mean, not that you're old, but let's
I'm glad you clarified that one.
Yeah, you've got some experience under your belt now. You've risen to the executive ranks. Any sort of looking back with hindsight, anything there?
So a couple of things. I think the first is how important downtime is.
Okay.
Like I've been in, I've regularly been in positions where I have pulled, crazy hours for a few weeks at a time, because sometimes you just need to. It's part of the job. You're going through a massive change or anything like that. But you then need to know when to pull back and to go, you know what? I'm going to go and get a massage at lunchtime. I'm going to take that break. I'm going to finish at a sensible time. I'm going to go and see my friends. I'm going to draw some boundaries, and having those boundaries and making sure you do get that chance just for your brain to unwind is really important. And I think the other thing is around kind of embracing challenges. So if you're going for a job and you don't find it a bit scary, it is probably not a big enough job. And you're going to get into that job, and then 3 months later, you're going to be bored. And obviously that's quite a personal thing for me. I clearly enjoy quite, a relatively high level of pressure, and I know not everyone does. But, you're going to go into these bigger roles, and they're going to get bigger, and you're going to start off a bit scared, and you will make mistakes. But it's about learning from those mistakes, not repeating them. And as we were talking about earlier, it's when you do things in little chunks rather than like massive change in a workplace. Even if you do make a mistake, it's much easier to correct it.
Yeah, I think, and you talk about, and I'm just kind of linking this back to something we spoke about earlier, understanding the context within which you're operating, the operating environment, if you will. I haven't found any better way to deal with that than say, well, we're just going to do little bits and we're going to get feedback, because that's almost, like a sixth sense that's out there and bringing this information back to you that you can say, okay, now I understand what's going on, the complexity, how these people are feeling, the processes, procedures. And this is something I've seen, like, for example, the NHS seems to consistently struggle with is, spoken to quite a few people from within that organization, and it's the decision makers are too far removed from the front line. So and they want to do things in big sign-offs because that's how it works. We've got our budget and we want to sign off this initiative. I don't want to come back, I want to sign it and then someone else goes and does it. It's like, it just doesn't actually work that way in reality.
It's like consultancy. Actually, the easy bit is strategy. The difficult bit is delivering it. And I know that's going to make me probably really unpopular, but it is, having that big idea is one thing, delivering it is different. And just a final thought on that side of things. So back when I was at the Environment Agency and I was in IT, every year they sent all of us, like not like all together, but it was something that was very highly encouraged. We would arrange sort of day trips out with the people who were actually doing the work. So I went inspecting flood defences and talked to them about IT and about what we were doing and about what challenges they were facing, because it meant it didn't matter that at that point I wasn't a decision maker, because I went back with knowledge and information that I then shared. And I think that link between sort of head office and the people doing the actual work is so important. And it's not actually that difficult to maintain, but it does require some thought. And yeah, it did require some thought and planning, but that was one of the best things I ever did to really understand what the organization actually did, and not just at an abstract level.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's particularly a pertinent message for shared services, is you really should understand what work gets done, how the business actually or organization operates, what it does every day. And the other thing, I'll just finish on this thought, and I know we've talked a bit of, straight into the project management realm a little bit, but for me, it's kind of like those waterfall type, okay, we start here, we have the critical path, blah, 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 and we know where the end. That's good for stuff when when you're doing something. So, okay, well, we're house builders and we've built 100 houses or 1,000 houses before, so we know how this works. We're engineers, we build bridges. Okay, we know how this works. But when you're doing things unknown for the first time, whether it be the first time or whether it be just the first time in that context or environment, and for a lot of these change programs, it is, because it's the new thing. So it is necessarily the first time even if it's, like I said before, you go and execs go, the staff go, yeah, we've seen 5 of you before say the same thing. At least with that person, it's new, right? That the agile approach of saying, do a short plan, implement it, test it and review it, and just keep going on that cycle, one item at a time, and slowly grow it bigger, I think is the only way, even if it seems slower, to get to the right, an answer that works.
I completely agree.
So cool. All right. Well, Sophie, it's been an absolute pleasure talking.
It's been awesome.
Thank you for just, being really open, honest, casual. Very much enjoyed it. All right, everybody out there, that brings us to the end of this episode of Enterprise Alchemy with the lovely Sofy Richards. I will see you guys on the next one.